London's West End and East Ends are familiar to many of us. For centuries, these halves of the capital have been the focus of government and trade, as well as home to much of the city's population. Consequently, many events that have shaped the past have emanated from the many famous and infamous people that lived, worked, or made political decisions there. Whilst the socio-economic reasons are too complex to mention here, it is suffice to say that, by the latter half of the 19th century, the wealthy generally, there were notable exceptions, lived in the West End, and the working class and the poor in its East End. However, such a story completely ignores a significant and, arguably, less discussed part of the metropolis, one that today is home to millions of people and thousands of businesses, but in the past was considered somewhere over there, distant and detached from the hustle and bustle of politics and culture north of the River Thames. You didn't really go south of the river unless you lived there or were passing through on your way out of London altogether. In fact, nearly 2,000 years ago, in what is now Southwark, the first settlement on the southern bank of the Thames opposite Roman Londinium was to be found. Though it was settled only as a result of location, it was the lowest bridging point across the river in what was otherwise, at that time, nothing but marshy tidal islands. In subsequent centuries, the lack of river crossings other than London Bridge curtailed development south of the river. Nevertheless, in the medieval period, Southwark grew significantly due to a lack of oversight from city authorities. It became a haven for criminals and disreputable attractions, including taverns, bull and bear baiting, theatres and brothels. Fast forward hundreds of years, and, in the 19th century, the coming of the railways such as the London to Greenwich line accelerated urbanisation. The County of London, formed in 1899, incorporated several boroughs south of the river into the city's administration. If you journeyed south of the river, you would find it to be a place of marked contrast, of suburban villas far from the river, but wharves, factories and slums along the riverside, accompanied by filth and rubbish-strewn streets. This was the scene that would greet you in the last days of the Victorian era, as much as it would in the early 1900s. Today, in an account of life in Edwardian-era South London written by a gentleman of the time who recorded the stories of people who lived there, you will discover the conditions in which typical working-class families lived. The vapour of the Riverside slums was said to be so impossible to explain as to be more of an atmosphere than a smell, a constant reminder of poverty and grinding life, of crowded homes, shut windows, inadequate washing facilities, and the damp of last week's rain. Find out how people lived in dilapidated old homes, in rooms in which you could barely tell its function, for people, when crowded and cramped through letting and subletting, slept everywhere and anywhere, surrounded by broken furniture and broken victuals. Yet, despite the construction of cleaner and better-built tenement blocks to replace these old homes, the Edwardians of South London still had to put up with poorly designed housing. A Victorian house could be adapted to accommodate modern washing facilities, whereas a modern block wasn't even constructed with the foresight of space for a bath. Before we move on, if you're interested in history like this, and you want to find out what life was really like for people in the past, please consider subscribing for more content. If you want to support what we make for you, check out the description for links to ways you can help us to continue bringing the past alive. It is said by the man who goes down the Strand that across the bridges of the Thames there lies a quarter of London where it is not possible to find a good tailor or a big hotel. Yet in this seeming desert, which stretches for 8 miles along the banks of the river, live all but 2 millions of mothers and fathers and children. Their life is full of incident, yet not adventurous. Goodness abounds, but there is little greatness. Few memorable buildings exist on the south bank to attract sightseers from the country or the colonies. Few streets seem suited for a royal procession. Even the best features have the sombreness of the second rate. The part that lies closest to the river is far poorer than the rest. On these streets poverty has set a seal, and its many problems have sunk their tangled roots deep into the life of the people. It is of the hopes and troubles that come to those who live here that I would speak, to trace the life of the average man by the riverside, to show his worth and possibilities, but will fall far short of suggesting the remedies which might transform his character and chances. The scene might well open on a Saturday night, when the streets will seem full of every happiness that is known to tired people in their leisure hours. Every road and every public house and shop is full of busy people. Gramophones and costermongers fill the air with noise. There is much to buy and see and talk about. A score of different pleasures that may be obtained for twopence assail the passer-by. Bedtime can well be postponed on such a night as this, and it is indeed late before the streets grow empty. Sunday morning sees a strange transformation. The roads are deserted, save for the few who hurry to church, or the boys who poke Sunday newspapers under the doors, or hang up milk cans on the nails so thoughtfully fixed in the wall of the few houses that can afford the luxury. All the world is asleep, for pleasure tires as much as work, and, after all, there's nothing to be done on Sunday morning. The only cry in the street is that of the milkman, or some hoarse veteran selling old issues of the comic papers at 5 for a penny. It is on such a morning that the street is at its worst. Saturday night's marketing has left many traces. Where stalls have filled a third of the roadway, the pavements are full of despised fragments. Half sheets of pink evening papers, bought so lightly and read so laboriously, and in the end serving to hold a pennyworth of fried fish and chipped potatoes, are hurried along the gutter by some early breeze. Here, too, lie outer leaves of vegetables, and the bones of some fish that was eaten by a lad sauntering home just before midnight. Empty cigarette packets and the red matches that are very cheap and almost as uncertain as the French ones are signs that Saturday was payday. In other streets, where stalls have never established a prescriptive right, the litter still prevails. Bits of clothing that once were rags, but now have passed that stage. Boots that will no longer hold a foot, even with the help of a string, lie about the roadway. They have been dropped or thrown there a little thoughtlessly, for each house has a large tin dust-bin where these grim relics of poverty may be hidden. Sometimes a fight may explain the old black bonnet with greasy velvet and only one string, or it may be the ecstasy of abandonment which bewitches a drunken woman. Throughout Sunday, and perhaps for longer, the streets are in this disorder, reminding the observer how sadly the smaller virtues of tidiness and order are forgotten in the course of a hard life, and how little pride is felt for a mean street by those who live in it. In the suburbs, the very absurdity of the names given to the roads and houses proclaims the pride of the householder. The man from the land of the villa is proud of his school, which has turned out 2 members of Parliament and half a dozen councillors, proud of his firm, which does a bigger trade in French rabbit skins than any other firm in the market, proud of his friends, proud of his flowers, his garden roller, and that quiet terrace of houses of which he rents but a 40th part. He will not allow fish bones or bonnet strings to lie 10 yards from the gate of Laburnum Villa, but in the riverside streets pride finds little place. Neither the name nor the condition of the street would suggest that anyone living there cared for this row of houses more than for any other. Thus the vicious circle of cause and effect is completed, for it is because pride has had a fall and died away that the places where men live have grown ugly and squalid, till now there is little or nothing to be proud of, and none can justly blame the indifference of the householder. The growth of local government is undoubtedly producing a slow, corporate self-consciousness, which is often betrayed into unwise and inartistic extravagances, but will lead ultimately to better things. In the meanwhile, the extent of the reforms accomplished is a little deceptive. The main streets, where comparatively few people live, are often paved with wood and cleansed more regularly, though the untidy Sunday will be long endured and with great difficulty overcome. The side streets, with their long rows of 4 or 6-roomed houses, each holding some 15 to 20 people, the courts and alleys and squares, are allowed to keep their dust and rubbish lying outside for days and days together. It may rot and smell, or flutter and roll about, but the public eye is not so generally offended. It is still the outside which is first to be cleansed. The small street, already noisy enough by very reason of its narrowness, must still retain the cobbles and sets of last century, while the macadam and wood is saved to please the ears of a wider and more powerful public. Once things are dirty, or noisy, or untidy, or unattractive, everything conspires to increase the failing and weaken the powers of natural resistance. Apart from dust and rubbish, the streets lack beauty or shape. They are long, but not wide enough to be impressive, and where the monotony is broken for the purposes of advertisement, it might with advantage have been preserved. Occasionally, an old churchyard, now administered by the local authority, offers a sight of green trees and tulips. Here are aged folks on iron seats, securely guarded by uniformed attendants and notice boards, for fear they may snatch wildly at a crocus, or roll on the grass for very joy at having reached the pensionable age. An open space, just large enough to surround a bandstand, where there is music once or twice a week, will break the line. One of these was espied by a small girl from a tram car. "What is that? Look, Daddy," she asked, and pulled the good man's sleeve just as he was lighting his pipe. The man looked, and then lit his pipe, looked again, and said, with the pride of a ratepayer, "That is a recreation ground." "What is that?" still pursued the girl. "A place where you play games, in the manner of speaking. That's what a recreation ground is, as you might say." The tram still stood stationary opposite the empty bandstand and its ring of forms and chairs, and the girl was looking hard, and her mind busy making pictures. "What sort of games do you play there?" was the final thrust. The man looked once again, took his evening paper from his pocket, spat over the side of the tram, and settled down to read. This is a question which all men are asking the lords of the earth. Some day an answer must be given. Apart from these rather limited delights, the streets can offer little recreation. The advertisement hoardings provide every colour and pictorial device that can arrest and stagger the ordinary eye. For the most part, they refer to the melodrama of the music halls, and depict the villainous villain, the heroic hero, and sometimes, as a contrast to both, a parson in full robes, with a broad, impassive face. The local drama forever clings to tragedy, and it is left for the purveyors of soap or milk or chocolate to exploit the art of comedy. On the one hand, there is a tendency, as the public eye grows glutted with horror and sensation, to grow more and more melodramatic, while, on the other, the higher class of advertisement is every year becoming more genuinely artistic and educative. But in any case, the poster is only an ephemeral joy to the man in the street. A rainy afternoon and a windy night leave them all in a sorry state, and forces the sensitive man to conclude that they are inevitably a disfigurement to the public street, and that a judicious attempt to suppress the necessary ones by taxation and licence would be of advantage both to the revenue and the happiness of the state. The eye of the loafer in the street does not travel far before it is dazzled by a public house. This and the school are the most frequent landmarks in the landscape, and their prominence suggests a strange contrast of dour solidity and garish fascination. In the evening, the lights of the public house are the brightest in the street. and even in the day there is no brass so polished and no windows so well rubbed as those of even the smallest beer-house. On a Saturday night in the summer, there are flowers on the counter. In the winter, holly or paper decorations hang from the ceiling of the bar. There are many of these bright oases, so few counter-suggestions, and in idle moments men are very moth-like. The shops are for the most part of unprosperous and desultory appearance. The small ones, which sell sweets, cigarettes, mineral waters, and the cheaper papers, are all very much alike. Outside they are fortified by the news bills of the halfpenny papers, sometimes a day and a half old, and an advertisement of ice cream soda, a mixture of 3 ingredients which were meant to live alone. The windows are rarely clean, and the goods they expose to view are arrayed as they have been for the last 6 months. Shops of this kind are constantly changing hands, for as a rule the profits are not sufficient to pay the rent of the room they occupy. The bigger provision shops are less dismal in appearance, and certainly more prosperous, but over them too has crept the blight of disorder and weariness. The goods in the window are specked with dirt, the cards which tell their prices stained and dog-eared. Hurry and poverty, and the acute geographical separation of rich and poor, have dragged down the ideals of a London street, robbing it of charm and colour and all those odd formations by which Englishmen are wont to remember their native town. All those who have taste and delicacy of perception in these things have long ago fled to the west, or the north, or the south, leaving behind them men whose eyes are dimmed by the struggle of life, and whose fibres are so toughened that they have forgotten to know and love the beautiful, and cannot be asked to recreate it, for they have lost the appetite. In the day when the absentee landlords of the Riverside, many of whom live as far away as Eaton Square, come again to visit the streets in which their ancestors were content to dwell, building solid houses beside their offices, they will put all this right. Instructions given to agents will be revised, houses will be colour-washed, and that frequently. The ugly will slowly give place to something that has character and shapeliness, and windows will not always be monotonously square. Till then the prospect, morning, afternoon, and evening, is in all seasons weary and worn out. And who shall say that in a measure this does not pitch the key in which men live? It is difficult to think of a street and forget its smells. In the winter they are a mere undercurrent to the senses, but July and August, and a warm September, bring them into prominence. The smells of factories and warehouses may be healthy enough, and easily forgiven by the man who passes the gates with perhaps a slightly quickened step, but the lads inside the factory or hop-yard may well grow tired of the flavour. The food smells, however, are still more pungent and more pervading. As soon as the policeman on his nightly beat has passed beyond the odour of one sizzling fried fish shop, he will reach that of another, while the jam-maker betrays his whereabouts to everyone within half a mile. The flavour of strawberry lives in every mouth through all July. It comes in through the window in the sultry night, fills the streets, and lurks in the very police station. But the third smell is the hardiest sinner. The vapour of the slum is so indefinable as to be more of an atmosphere than a smell. It is the constant reminder of poverty and grinding life, of shut windows and small, inadequate washing basins, of last week's rain, of crowded homes and long working hours. Those who have never left their riverside homes do not know of it, but for the man fresh from Christ Church Meadow or the Radley Links, it pours out from each open door and hangs about every staircase in the model dwellings. To such a man it is a veritable oppression in the summer, and can only be combated by roses from the country, which some rectory gardens never forget to send. This cheerful panorama must close with a soft, gentle shower of dirt, which falls and creeps and covers and chokes. No man can cope with it. Here and there a gifted woman keeps pace with the tide, cleaning and cleaning with the same uncomplaining consistency that some men show in drinking beer. Such a home will be fresh and spotless, despite a window opened wide in defiance of nature's operations. But most of the neighbours are content with a lower standard, and seek to compensate for a coating of dirt by the short-lived smartness of their ornaments. The factory chimneys are strictly forbidden to smoke, and nearly all obey with a will. The worst offender is the refuse destructor of the borough council, which seems beyond the reach of bylaws. But dust and dirt accumulate despite restrictions, and with them comes a stickiness that creeps from the fingers up the arm, and puts washing on almost the same plane as smoking, as a soothing practice associated with home and repose. The more fastidious are often declared, when they visit their dirtless friends in the country, to be looking pale and tired. The fault lies with their love of soap. Constant washing in hot water destroys the complexion, and makes the clean look ill, while a less particular native appears to thrive. The street must be left now, unsightly and despondent, with its smells and dust. Yet on a Saturday night in the summer it will be full of life and change, with a kaleidoscope of light hearts and laughing faces passing up and down. Let a pause be made to look at the homes where children are born and become old and die. Along the south bank of the Thames, philanthropy and business have tried to join hands in the erection of vast piles of block buildings, 6 stories high, with stone staircases and 4 tenements to every floor. But it is doubtful whether so far the ends of the businessman and the housing reformer can be made to meet. A difficulty not unknown to tenants of these buildings. The evening visitor will sigh many times before he reaches the 5th flight. He may have fallen over the cube sugar box on the wheels of a bygone trolley, which stands outside number 131 and serves as a perambulator and a barrow. He will have guessed the menus of some 15 dinners or teas, and wondered why philanthropists are so opposed to light. He will also wonder how infant legs can scramble up and down to their crowded home a dozen times a day, and whether infant hearts are not sometimes unduly strained. Having struck his head against the wall on the 5th landing, he will add insult to injury by striking a few matches on the wall to see the number on the door. Reassured, he will knock and wait in the gloom, shrinking into the corner to make way for a family bound for the world below. If he is an old inhabitant, he will know of a way through the door. A hand inserted through a slit would grasp a string attached to the latch on the inner side. A sharp tug, a shove, and the door is open before him. By this simple and trusting device, the mother is able to go out shopping and leave the rooms empty, and the children returning from school or work can unlock the door without a key. It is counted a safe practice, for only the members of the family are supposed to know the ropes. But the method is so common that any denizen of the buildings could find his way into half the tenements as he passed up or down the stairs. The keys themselves, moreover, provide but a meagre safety, for they are of the simplest pattern, and made so much alike as to be in many cases interchangeable. But there is little or no danger of burglary, for when household goods are made neither of silver nor gold, but of sham mahogany and heavily painted china, there is no need to employ the genius of Chubb or Yale. Having gained entrance by one means or another, the visitor will be compelled to walk warily in order to avoid a perambulator or bicycle, or even a chest of drawers, and possibly all 3. The air will be heavily laden with a suggestion of fish and bedding, and the windows will be found tightly shut and latched. 1 or 2 may be open for an inch or 2, but blinds and curtains will prevent there being much danger of a draught. The rooms appear to be of a comfortable size, but overladen with furniture, bought largely on the hire system, and not always calculated to outlive the final payment. The springs of the armchair touch the ground. It rocks uneasily in a diagonal fashion, for only 2 out of 4 casters survive, the others having been put away in a drawer, with a wonderful collection of other oddments which no one has the heart to throw away. There may be a piano, 2 notes missing, probably also in the drawer, in the hope that they may come in useful some day. Half a dozen others quite dumb, and the rest very yellow, but vibrating with life. To atone for these defects, its legs are very knobby, and the candles are green, with pink flowers creeping round them. This also was bought on the hire system, when it was by no means new, but already had a Pythagorean remembrance of many different lives in the west and in the east. For pianos begin in the west of London, and in their declining days sink farther and farther east, while barrel organs arise in the east, and travel with the sun to soothe the savage breasts in Kensington. The rooms abound with photographs and memorials of each bank holiday. The drawers are so full that something will be trapped or pushed back each time they are opened. Letters and concert programs are rarely destroyed, but linger in unexpected places for years together. Clothes soon overflow the small accommodation that exists for them. Skirts and Sunday hats hang on the back of every door, or droop listlessly from the bedposts. Worse than all, clothes are often laid on the bed under the mattress, to be neatly pressed for a whole week. On the table are the signs of a meal throughout the day, for the teacups and crumbs of breakfast linger till the midday dinner. There is no sharp distinction between what is and what is not a bedroom. Where homes are small and families are large, there must needs be a bed of some sort in every room. Nearer the suburbs may be found some parlours that have never known bedding, but by the riverside there is not space for such niceties. Of pictures there are not many, for a photograph of a wedding or of a party on the beach at Southend has more personal interest and is more naturally bought. Some pictures as do hang on the wall are always old ones, in still older frames. It is doubtful whether any new pictures are being bought. Certainly few or none can be seen exposed for sale in the shops. The themes of such works of art are the old simple themes of love and war. The tone they strike is sentimental and tragic. A boy of comparatively advanced taste found himself once in the rooms of an Oxford undergraduate, and, while studying the walls, was asked which picture he preferred. He fixed without hesitation on some engraving, a possession of the landlady rather than the undergraduate, where a small drummer boy was dying against fearful odds. There is always this natural bias towards tragedy where culture has not made its way. The general impression conveyed by such a room is one of crush and messiness, caused by a shortage of cupboards and chests of drawers, and that curious aversion of the poor man or woman, tenacious of his little wealth, to clear out of his castle every month the things that are no longer needed. Yet on occasions when poverty presses ruthlessly upon a family, when no single member is earning a regular wage, the house will grow sadly empty of these prized possessions. One by one they will travel to the pawn-shop in borrowed newspapers, till at last but a single bed and the stove of the gas company remain. Then is the room bitterly tidy, yet barely a home. The same philanthropists have provided in these compact little tenements no scullery to contain a copper for washing clothes, a coal-hole, or a sink. The 4 families must use in common the single tap and sink that are to be found at the back of each landing. Furthermore, their pessimism made them think the idea of a bathroom fantastic and absurd. They would have explained, with a show of foresight, that the poor did not care for washing over much, and would be likely to use the bath as a receptacle for anything else, rather than water and themselves. Their judgment was for the moment sound. 20 years ago it is true that a bath in each tenement would have served variously as a waste-paper basket, a wardrobe, a dust-bin, and a sink, or even possibly a bed. In the same way, it once happened that for many years the Thames embankment was not used as a public thoroughfare, its true purpose being so far forgotten that its very loneliness made it a danger rather than a convenience. The business-like pessimism was so starved of ideal and hope as to be without true foresight, for it is only the man who believes in his fellows that can hope to foretell the tendencies of the future. 10 years or more have passed since these ugly barracks were set up. The children at the elementary schools have begun to go regularly to the municipal baths. They have learnt the comfort of a weekly plunge and the glow of a clean, warm body. Working boys have banded themselves into clubs for cricket and football, boxing and wrestling, and found that all these things lead to bathing, sponging and toweling. Thus the demand has arisen, and there is no supply. Many a boy would welcome the daily bath and would not allow any domestic requirements to interfere with his enjoyment. It is too late. The buildings are so planned, the system of pipes so arranged, as to render the insertion of a bath all but impossible, for the alterations can only be made at considerable expense. So another 50 or 100 years must roll by, and the aspirations after health, kindled with much effort and difficulty, must be all but stifled, because our builders were not filled with the optimism that can afford to laugh at mere common sense. The same ignorance of how their neighbours live led the builders to provide a small coal box for each tenement, in which only 200 weight can be held at once. This compels each family in the hard days of winter to indulge yet more freely in their economic vice. They are always tempted to buy in small quantities, and so pay exorbitant prices. In the matter of coal there is, once again, no opportunity for the growth of better principles. They are forever forced to buy coal by the hundredweight, and pay 4pence more for every sack. It is true that cooperation is a slow growth, and in its imperfect stages conceals many dangers. But the architect who provided for a common coal cellar, which might be guarded and administered by the porter of the buildings, or a common bathroom at the foot of each staircase, would have been indeed a practical prophet, opening the door to cleaner and happier common life. The building of the seaside hotel leaves room for the tide to rise. The railway engineer makes allowance for the expansion of his metals. In future, the builder of men's dwellings will be wise to keep his eyes on the potential habits of his neighbours, and not set an everlasting seal across the doors of human development. Such buildings, although gigantic in size and by no means rare in number, still only represent a proportion of the housing accommodation. The majority of families will, in all probability, always occupy the ordinary 3-storied house. These vary infinitely in conditions of health and comfort, but very few are cleaner or better built than the block buildings described. They have many failings which make them far less desirable. It is uncommon for one family to use a whole house. They may pay rent for the 3 stories, but one floor at least will be sublet or let out to lodgers. In the streets nearer the riverside, and in the smaller courts off the main streets elsewhere, the buildings are in a state of extreme dilapidation. The doors are no longer secure. The stair rail is gone, having often been made to serve as firewood in the winter when coals are 1 shilling and 6pence a hundredweight. There are ugly circles in the ceiling, where the plaster has fallen and exposed to view the broken, rotting laths. The walls of each room are thick with an accumulation of old papers that should long ago have been stripped, if only to destroy the swarms of vermin that thrive between each layer of flowers. The outer walls are stained with perpetual damp. In the upper rooms there are signs of leakage through the roof. The floors have rotted into holes, where dirty stagnant water soon collects. Homes such as these are nearly always overcrowded, but are rarely tenanted for long. There is a difficulty about the rent, or the woman upstairs has a grievance against the second floor, and several private hints to offer with regard to behaviour. A quick move is made to rooms of a similar kind. Insanitation and epidemic dangers are naturally enough part of the heavy rent that everyone must pay who live there years in places such as these. Stale air and damp breed weakness when they do not give rise to fever. The figures of typhus and diphtheria vary with the seasons and are carefully recorded, but who keeps account of rheumatics and chronic colds and recurring sores? Between these dim haunts and the best type of block buildings there is every grade of house and building. The worst are the crimes of the avaricious against the weak, and even in the best The builder's ignorance has starved the life that he was meant to brighten and sustain. The builder must needs know something of those for whom he builds. The architect designs a house, not for his board of direction, who are not going to live there, but for a number of families who need a home. The diamond merchant does not ask a plumber, but a jeweller, to cast a setting for his stones. The gardener will at any rate be consulted when his conservatories are built. A knowledge of poor men, a sympathy with their struggle and defeat, and a yearning that they may climb to better days. These are the foundations on which houses and block dwellings may best be built.